Okay, so what if I told you that some of the absolute greatest products ever engineered turned into complete and utter failures? Like, we're talking best-in-class specs, brilliant features, the whole shebang, but nobody bought them. Why does that happen? Well, today in this Explainer, we're going to unravel a massive business mystery. It's the paradox of failure, and we're looking at exactly why great products die.
Okay, let's dive into this. When a highly anticipated, beautifully designed product just crashes and burns, we really have to look past the hardware. I mean, was the product actually the problem, or was it the business surrounding it? To figure this out, we kind of need to treat these failures like commercial crime scenes. We have to separate the physical thing being sold from the strategy that was used to sell it. Because as you'll see, having a phenomenal item in your hands, that is literally just the very beginning of the journey.
And that brings us to what we like to call the great product myth. You see, there's this super common yet incredibly dangerous assumption floating around the business world. It's the belief that just having a great product automatically guarantees success. It's so tempting to think, right? Like, hey, if I build the most advanced tech or brew the best tasting drink, the world's going to beat a path to my door. But honestly, the evidence tells a completely different story. Relying on the product alone is a massive trap, and it's actually bankrupted some of the smartest innovators out there.
So what's the antidote to that trap? Well, it's basically the golden rule of business: product market fit. Listen, it totally doesn't matter if your tech is absolutely revolutionary if it's looking for a problem that just doesn't exist. Solving a tangible, real-world point of friction for an actual human being, that will always, absolutely always, beat having cool tech just for the sake of it.
Let's check out our first major piece of evidence at the crime scene, the timing trap. And honestly, there is no better example of this than Google Glass. The engineering here was absolutely cutting edge, but it became the ultimate classic example of arriving entirely too early. Society just wasn't ready for cyborg-like wearables walking around. Privacy concerns flared up instantly, turning early adopters into, well, social outcasts and sparking massive public pushback. The product actually worked beautifully. The timing, though, absolutely catastrophic. Now, what's really interesting about this is the core conflict going on here. On one side, you've got highly advanced technology, but on the other, you have market readiness. You absolutely need both of these to weigh evenly on the scales. You can literally invent the future, but if you try to force it onto a market that is entirely stuck in the present, the scales tip, and your product fails. So, if the tech itself isn't enough, and your timing has to be spot on, what else is missing? Well, that brings us to the next vital piece of our mystery, which is the power of storytelling. See, customers don't just buy a list of features on a spec sheet, they buy value, they buy emotion. A product desperately needs a narrative that connects with the user on a deeply human level. If you can't explain why a product actually matters to someone's daily life, I promise you, the greatest engineering in the world is not going to save you. Let's compare two legendary rivals to see this in action: the Microsoft Zune and the Apple iPod. Purely on paper, the Zune was a total powerhouse. A lot of people argued it actually had superior hardware and better specs, like its super innovative Wi-Fi sharing. But here's the thing: Microsoft sold a piece of hardware. Apple sold an emotion. While the Zune was busy pushing technical capabilities, Apple promised 1,000 songs in your pocket. They positioned the iPod as a lifestyle, an identity. Apple won this war not because of superior tech, but entirely because of superior storytelling. Branding does a great job of establishing perceived value. But what happens when the actual price tag doesn't match that perceived value? This right here is the absolute core of pricing strategy. You can build an excellent, genuinely life-changing product, but if your customers fundamentally feel that the cost outweighs the value it offers them, they're just going to walk away. The price has to make sense, and not just for your profit margins. It has to make sense for the story you've told the customer and the exact problem you're solving for them.
Now, let's pivot for a second to what is probably the most famous cautionary tale in business history. Yup, the New Coke disaster. So the company had this incredibly successful, globally beloved product, and they just decided to change the formula. They completely, totally underestimated the deep, almost visceral emotional attachment their customers had to the original Coke. We are talking about massive public protests here, tens of thousands of angry phone calls literally flooding their headquarters.
Their fatal error really came down to this: trying to change a working formula versus honoring deep customer loyalty. The executives desperately wanted to win blind taste tests in a controlled, sterile lab, but they completely forgot that out in the real world, consumers had this lifelong emotional attachment to the brand they grew up with. Ignoring that reality drastically backfired.
And it's a huge lesson, right? It shows us that your product doesn't just belong to you. In the minds of the consumers, it belongs to them. Which brings us to a much more modern disaster, Quibi. These guys raised an astronomical $1.75 billion with a B before they even launched. They had Hollywood A-listers, an incredibly slick mobile platform, the works. But here's the hard truth. Massive capital absolutely cannot save a business that fundamentally misunderstands its target market. You just can't buy your way out of a bad business strategy, no matter how amazing your app looks. So what happened? Well, Quibi basically assumed people would pay for short videos on the go. They completely ignored the reality that consumers already had free, absolutely endless content on platforms like YouTube and TikTok. They walked blindly right into a space that was already dominated by much stronger competitor ecosystems. It just goes to show that a slick piece of software cannot beat entrenched consumer behavior. They entered with the wrong strategy, fundamentally misunderstood how people actually consume content, and man, they paid the ultimate price for it.
And this brilliantly illustrates the entire puzzle we've been putting together. The physical product itself, that might only account for, say, 15% of your success. You also absolutely need the right timing, the right branding, and really smart pricing. But the largest component by far, that massive 35% slice right there, is adaptation. A great product might get your foot in the door, but your ability to adapt, that dictates whether you actually get to stay in the building. So let's pivot this explainer away from our victims of failure and talk about the ultimate solution. How do successful businesses actually survive out there? Well, they do it by constantly adapting. You see, the market is never static. It's literally always shifting. New competitors arrive, economies change, and customer preferences evolve all the time. The companies that thrive don't just build a great product, pat themselves on the back, and go to sleep. No way. They embrace constant change. Executing that adaptation requires a continuous loop. You have to test your idea, aggressively gather customer feedback, relentlessly improve the product, and then adapt and realign with the market. The most successful companies out there never, ever assume their first draft is perfect. They check their egos at the door. They take what might have been a fatal flaw and turn it into their greatest strength, strictly by actively listening to the very people they are trying to serve. Because the truth is, failure, it's really just a stepping stone. Many of today's billion-dollar companies, the ones we look up to as absolute titans of industry, failed multiple times before they succeeded. But their initial failures weren't the end of their story, strictly because they actually learned from their mistakes. They didn't point fingers and blame the customer for not understanding their great product. Instead, they looked inward, they adapted their business model, and they tried again with a vastly better strategy. Which finally brings us to the ultimate resolution of our mystery today. And it's this. The market doesn't reward the best product, it rewards the product that delivers the most value to the right people at the right time. That is the secret. It is not about being the smartest engineer in the room. It's really about having perfect timing and profound empathy for your customer. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought. You've seen the traps. You know now that just having a great product simply isn't enough. You understand the absolute critical importance of timing, of story, of pricing, and of constant iteration. So, looking forward to your own ventures and your own innovations, how will you adapt your next big idea? Think on that. And until next time, keep analyzing, keep iterating, and keep learning.